So you look at a statement like this and it's okay, supply represents the behavior of sellers. Okay, duh, I guess. And right there it is, and you've had it put before you in the book and here. But for some reason, this is something that doesn't readily sink in. Because we're so used to thinking like consumers that we think that anything that has anything to do with consumers must also affect the supply of the good. Yes, it may affect the quantity supplied. That's that semantic thing again, right? So, see, I drew some pictures up here. I could refer to them. See, this is a change in supply. The line moved. Okay, change in quantity supplied, no line moving. Remember, this is that rare thing. Like yesterday, my wife called and said, it's raining. Okay, it only rained for about 10 minutes, and maybe only downtown where we live. Okay, so, if you'd walked around outside for 10 minutes, during those 10 minutes, you would have got a free drink of water. So X being water, yeah, this is right. But for the vast majority of things, it looks like this. Okay, so make sure you model correctly. Okay, there's almost always a minimum opportunity cost. See, that's what this starting point says. It says there isn't anybody out there producing X that is willing to put a unit of X out on the market for anything less than whatever this number is. That's what that says. And make sure as you review these various graphs, you do your due diligence and you say in words to yourself what it is the graph is saying. Or if you make a shift in the graph, what shift you intended to make, and then look at it and see if you actually intended to make it. I drew this one up here because this represents a part of a common mistake. Okay? A student will draw this, and because the arrows are going up, they'll say, oh, that's a supply increase. No, it's a supply decrease. How do you avoid that mistake? Okay, by testing. What do you test? You stick a price on here and you say, okay, is the amount offered for sale more or less at the new supply line? Oh, it's less. Something must have happened to the suppliers that makes them less eager to sell at this price. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so see the arrows are kind of deceiving. Okay, you think increase. Okay, increase. No, that's a decrease. Okay, think left. Right, and in addition to moving up, it's moved left. Okay, left, whether it's supply or demand, left, decrease, right, increase. Up or down, that'll work fine on demand, but not on supply. Not a whip, fishing line. Fishing for questions. All right, so seemingly obvious statements that we just kind of brush by kind of quickly. We need to let them simmer and soak in and sink in and whatever to make sure we don't make silly mistakes. Okay, what turn out to be silly mistakes? Those are the ones where when you review the test, you go, oh no, whoops, that was kind of hard. I need to wake up. But anyway, you go, oh no, how did I do that? There was a reason that it happened. Figure it out so it doesn't happen again. You've heard of that statement of something happens, shame on them, right? The second time it happens, shame on you, right? Same thing when you look over test results. If you don't identify the underlying reason that you made the mistake, you'll have the same underlying reason for other mistakes later on. Okay, so always make sure you know why you made a mistake and what you will do what you'll do differently next time. I must have hit myself too hard that first time. What you'll do differently next time to make sure you don't make the same mistake again. Okay, so you probably recognize this slide sort of. Last time you saw it, it said demand curve and quantity demanded, but pretty much said the same kinds of things. Yes?
For the chart, the graph, the middle one that says David Greer, what, making it, in the market, what would that mean? Buying something?
Well, it means, yeah, see, you're thinking like a consumer. This doesn't say anything about consumers. All this says is it describes sellers. Okay, and it says, right here, this point says, that even at a price of zero, some will be available to buy. No. See, that's you doing your due diligence. You're thinking out loud what the graph says. and then you look at some part of it or all of it, either the slope of it or where it starts or where it ends, you go, no. Okay, and then you go, you erase and you redraw it like this, and now you go, yeah, that makes sense. I believe that. Oh, there are exceptions. Water. Okay? See, it does slope upward, which says, yeah, if you're standing outside when it rains, you'll get some free water. You want more than that? Well, you're going to have to put some pipes in the ground and pump water out of the ground and so on. So the marginal cost, see, that's what supply lines reflect, is the marginal cost changing, the change in the total cost when you make more, marginal cost. And we'll get into that with some of the numbers here in a minute. But that's what the supply line is telling you, is how the opportunity cost, what you give up to do it, remember opportunity cost from chapter 2, what you give up to do it, changes as the quantity changes. See, and at some point you get to where the seller says, I'm not making any more. The opportunity cost of the next one that I could possibly make is more than what I can sell it for. So I'm stopping here. See, good question. Okay, and sometimes questions raise more questions, and they should be asked. That's why we're here. I know it's hard to fight the notion, lecture and, content conveyance. And yeah, sure, there's content, and it's conveyed, hopefully. But there's also a lot of content that's skipped over by clicking the button like this, not talking about some things too much. And it's just because I'm putting it out there in case you want to talk about it, and if you don't, then I'll just go right on by. Okay, so we draw an upward sloping line, whether it starts in the wrong place on the x-axis or in the right place on the y-axis. Either way, it still says this, what this slide says. If you keep everything the same but raise the price, the amount that the sellers were willing to sell will increase. Okay, or vice versa. If the price, for whatever reason, goes down by market shifting or the government declaring it or whatever, there's just not going to be as much available for sale. So, for example, if somebody says, the landlords are charging too much, just pass a law that caps rents. Because that's a big part of your budget, right? Oh, that's such a neat idea. Well, unfortunately, you run into that second bullet there. When the price falls, whatever the reason, whether it's from market forces or some law is passed, like rent control, which some cities still have for some apartments, the amount available will decrease. And guess what? The quantity demanded will increase. And now you'll have a shortage. And if you're in an apartment, you may do okay. The rent may go down. If you start looking for one, as they say in New York, forget about it. And literally about apartments in New York, because that's one place that has rent controls. Forget about it. You're not going to find an apartment. Right? The quantity demanded will exceed the quantity supplied. Right? So if the price falls, less will be available than before. And I guarantee you at a lower price, people aren't going to want to buy less than they did before. Okay? So there'll be a shortage. I'm jumping the gun a little bit on chapter 4 and a few things, but that's okay because chapter 4 is next and it's going to be before the test. See, the chapter 4 gets into draw the supply and demand together and then what happens. Yeah, okay, that isn't in chapter 3 yet, but yeah, a couple times I've talked about that and drawn it on the board and so on. Oh, all right. Okay. So. Oh, now, one thing I want to add that as long as I just nibble at it a little bit is okay, and that's all I'm going to do. But when we talk about supply, we're talking about in the short run. And that's why you see some of the questions that I write have the word quickly in them. Because in the long run, the supply line doesn't necessarily have an upward slope. We see that around us all the time. Markets expand, right? Quantity supplied increases and the price stays about the same and maybe even goes down in some cases. How is that? Well, because in the short run, if we want more, there are going to be increased opportunity costs of making more stuff from existing businesses. Right? They either have to expand, right, or we have to get into some businesses that are out there that have higher costs than others. But see, in the long run, the number of businesses isn't fixed. Okay, so in the long run, more businesses can form, and we can produce a larger amount at the same price. Okay, so if some of you think, and you should be thinking these kinds of thoughts. Doc, this is kind of weird. I see things expanding all the time and the price hasn't gone up. What's this deal about an upward sloping supply line? Well, it's about the immediate or quick effect. See, and that's how the market works, right? As the price rises in the short run, and that's what motivates new businesses to form. See, that's the signaling process. You compete up the price when you want something, and then the potential producers and the actual producers say, it's a pretty attractive price, it having gone up. I'm going to start a business doing X. See, and then the supply line shifts to the right, and that offsets the demand increase, and the price comes back down. Okay, so short run, yeah, this is the way it is. But in the long run, when the number of businesses and the capital investment, the capital stock of existing businesses can change, the supply line can even slope downward. See, there's a way to blow somebody's mind at a cocktail party. Yeah, it's saying, oh, well, they'll be more available at lower prices in the long run. Wait a minute. I took Eco 101. My professor told me the supply line sloped upward. Yeah, it does. That's in the short run when the capital stock of existing businesses is fixed and when the number of businesses is fixed. Okay, and that's the signaling process in the short run price increase with an increase in demand. That increases competition, okay, causes market entry. That supply shifter, right, the number of businesses, the number of producers is something that shifts the supply line. The opposite of this, right, this is if there's fewer businesses, right, if something happens to decrease the number of businesses doing something, the supply line shifts to the left. But in most markets, most of the time, unless the product is becoming obsolete, there's a dynamic going on. The demand increases because of population growth and income growth, and that increases the price in the short run, and then firms enter the market, and that pushes it back down again. That's what's going on in most markets all the time. It's self-regulating. It's almost magic, right? We can hire thousands of people to centrally plan the economy and decide what gets produced and how much of it gets produced, and have shortages and just a total disaster from having employed all these people to try to be smart and tell us how much of each thing to produce. And we can get a much better result by employing no one to decide how much to produce and where to produce it and how to produce it, and just let the price system do the job. See, that's the part that's kind of magic. It's just the fluctuation of prices signals to potential producers whether they should be doing X or Y or Z or something else. And it allocates resources between markets. All right, I'm jumping ahead a little bit again, but that's okay. Repetition is good. Some of that will definitely come up later in the semester, a lot of it in Chapter 4 next week. All right, so here's our graph. And supply lines are often curved. I'm a little lazy. I usually just draw them as a straight line. They're often called supply curves just out of habit, whether they're curved or not. And remember, I do concrete examples, so think in terms of X being concrete. And Tabarrok and Cowan usually do oil. Okay, so here's their graph for oil. Okay, indicating that 10 million barrels per day, and I got to email Alex still. I know Tabarrok. He didn't stick next to Q the time period. That's just, well, it's easy to forget if you've been doing it for years and years, but you should always, you have to have a time dimension here to know what the quantity is for the price, right? I mean, the quantity available at this price, this quantity, depends on how long, right? Whether this is quantity per week, per year, per month, per day, per hour, whatever. And you can see their graph, it doesn't even say what MBD stands for, million barrels per day. Oh, it does? Wait a minute. Yeah. Okay. Per million barrels per day. Anyway, so there's the time dimension. But they don't define what the D stands for. But I looked it up, and that's what it stands for. Okay, so there's always a time dimension on the Q-axis, and on the Y-axis, it's price per unit. And you should almost always, I can think of one exception, you should almost always have the same units on the X and Y axis. So don't have feet on the Y axis, price per square foot, and then have tons on the Y axis, tons per day. No, it doesn't work. Tons. Okay. So just some things that are easy to forget and easy to get you confused. if you do forget them. They become second nature at some point. All right, again, so here's a slide that should look pretty familiar from having done the demand. Yeah, we can do the price quantity thing, vertically or horizontally, right? It's more normal to do it horizontally. The price is constantly changing. It's the signaling method for both the short run and the long run. So here what horizontal means is, okay, if that's the price, okay, whatever the supply line is, 0 is now, 1 is later. Okay, so right now that would be the quantity available to buy, quantity offered for sale. And if the supply line were to shift to the left because one of the 7 supply shifters moved to decrease supply, then the amount available at this price per unit would be lower at that quantity. And then vertically, sometimes one might ask, if we want these many, say, tanks produced, military tanks, okay, how much will it cost? Government's got to do budgeting, right? Okay, so in that sense, you would do the vertical thing. Okay, you would say, okay, let's hire some economists to estimate the supply, which, by the way, is a non-trivial task, right? Is to collect data and try to figure out what today's market supply for something is. Okay? But once you hire the right people and they get the job done, then you can say, okay, for a given quantity, how much are we going to have to offer the producers in order for that many of them to be produced? Okay, and then we can put that in the budget and figure out, okay, we've got to ask the Congress for this much money to have this many tanks produced or to buy this much oil for our military. All right, so again, as it says here, how many dollars per unit it'll take, or for a given price, how much will be available. Okay, so just repeating itself there. Okay, and here's a graph illustrating it. I just did it on the board, but I did it kind of fast. Why did I do it kind of fast? Because I knew this slide was coming up. Okay, so specify a price and the supply line, the supply function. I hate that word. Supply function. Okay, the supply schedule. I'm saying in several different words the same thing, hoping at least one will click. Schedule graphs into a line. The line or the schedule. What's a schedule? A list of numbers, right? Q column, P column. The Q and P's correspond. Graph those, you get the line. Okay, or a function. Okay, and then, of course, there's the vertical. Okay, again, we did that. I did it kind of fast. Okay, there's what I did up on the board. Okay, and why did I do it kind of fast? Well, I don't want to put you to sleep for one thing, but I knew this slide was coming up. So more Q&A. Remember, a denial is not just a river in Africa. Okay? In other words, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you might think maybe I should have read the chapter before class. You might have thought that. But get over your embarrassment and say, got to get ready and raise your hand. Okay? Don't keep your state of confusion or whatever it exactly is to yourself. All right, why is the supply curve upward sloping? I got into that a few minutes ago again, but here it is, and we can talk about these exact words. It's a matter of some suppliers have different opportunity cost structures than others. Some suppliers have different opportunity cost structures than others. What does that mean? Well, it means that the supply line for the market as a whole is an aggregation of a bunch of individual supply lines for individual producers. Some of them have, one of them at least, one of the firms that produces X has an opportunity cost this low for some output. But many of the other producers may not have an opportunity cost that low. Okay, so if we expand the amount that we would like to have available to buy, we may need to get some of the producers whose opportunity costs are relatively high. Oil is a pretty good way to illustrate that. I'm trying to think, okay. I think there's another slide later where they actually do that. Yeah, there is. Okay, there it is. Gosh, I went over this in my office 20 minutes ago, and I couldn't remember. Okay, yeah, there it is. That's the one. I think I mentioned this before, but Saudi Arabia is just a very, very low opportunity cost producer of oil. They're just lucky in the sense that you can go almost anywhere in Saudi Arabia, I've heard, poke a hole in the ground, not even all that deep, and if you stick a pipe next to the hole you poked in the ground, it'll practically load itself on a tanker, right? Because it's downhill to the ocean, right? And so, low-cost oil, right? Even at a very, very, very low cost per barrel, they could make money. Okay, so they would supply even at, according to that graph, even at way less than $10 a barrel. But that's not going to happen here in Texas anymore. It used to be, we poke a hole in the ground here in Texas and get a lot of oil out of the ground. Without all that's been taken out of the ground a long time ago. And my wife's grandfather was in the oil business, and he died 10 years ago before all this fracking and stuff going on. And he said, well, we walked away from a lot of oil in South Texas. Well, guess what? We walked back to it now that somebody developed a new technology to get at all the oil that we couldn't get out of the ground before. But it's high-cost oil. It's not exactly oil shale, but it's oil from shale. That's a different thing, by the way. Oil shale is rock that if you do stuff to it, you can get oil out of it. That's expensive. The price of oil is going to have to be real high. But there's plenty of it. So that we're not worried about running out of oil. It's just a question of what cost it's going to be, how much we're going to pay for it. Right? So, wow, when are we going to run out of oil? Never, basically. There'll be plenty of oil somewhere to be had at some cost, long after we move on to some other way of moving ourselves around that doesn't take oil. But it's very expensive under current technologies. Oil shale would cost a lot to turn into oil. And oil from shale, which is what we're doing now in a lot of places, and why the price of gasoline's fallen to about 60% of where it was just a few years ago. It was tickling $4 a gallon, and now it's sneaking up on $2 a gallon. Okay, so we shifted that supply line a lot through inventing fracking and all these other things. But still, oil from shale is not going to be as cheap to do as poking a hole in the ground in Saudi Arabia and putting a pipe next to the hole you poke in the ground and letting it practically load itself into the nearest tanker. Okay? So, for example, if the price went down really low, the Saudis would continue to produce oil. But the producers in South Texas and West Texas, they'd go, I'm done, I'm out of here, shutting down, because they wouldn't be able to survive at that low price. All right, so that's that. Remember, consumer surplus. That's the buyer's gain from trade. Okay, well, producers are smiling too when they make a sale, right? A handshake. Yes, it's a deal, right? So then they're both smiling usually. Yeah, some more than others, If you're a good negotiator, you can claim a bigger share of the overall gains from trade. Gains from trade, you say, Doc, what's that? Producer surplus plus consumer surplus is the gains from trade. Right? And how it's divvied up, that's kind of advanced economics. But there's always some of each, otherwise there wouldn't be a trade. Right? Producer surplus is the seller's gain from trade. What's the seller's gain from trade? Think about it. Yes, think about it. Yes, I'm not just a stenographer taking notes, and yes, you have a brain. You can think about it. Why are producers smiling when they make a deal? Right? Because the price they're getting is more than their opportunity cost. Right? See, that's that getting to duh that I keep saying. That's when you're studying. If you're just memorizing what you don't understand, you never get to duh. Okay, but if you think about producer surplus, okay, that's the seller's gain from trade. How do sellers gain from trade? Oh, by selling it for more than it costs them to make it. Okay, and see, from that it follows where it is in the graph. Okay, and then you can do some simple math and put a number to it. Okay, but first you have to understand it, because otherwise it'll just get meshed in with a bunch of other things you're trying to remember, and you'll get your wires crossed, and it'll be a disaster. And some of you are doing the river in Africa thing right now, and no, I'm still going to wait until September 14th, and at midnight I'm just going to memorize like crazy, and then I'll be ready for the test, and then the test will go terribly badly, and you wonder, wow, I studied really hard, and maybe I should turn the microphone off because I'm tempted to scream at you. No, you didn't. You did something that was painful and it took a lot of time, but it wasn't studying. No matter how many times you've done it, and no matter how many times it's even worked for a good grade, because you forgot it all a couple of days later. You didn't learn a bleeping thing from it. Okay, so don't do that for this, because this really matters. This is important. Okay, you need to know these basic things in order to function decently in life and to become the professional that you want to be. Okay, so think about it. Okay, make the math, the word formula, there it is. Make the formula make sense, not just as something, memorize, this minus this times that. Okay, yeah, eventually you have to do some processing, the numbers, but make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing. All right. Okay, well, here it is. Now, this supply line, is kind of borderline. Right? What is it saying? It's, it says out there's somebody that can produce this at almost a zero opportunity cost. Well, all right, fine, it's the supply line, and we can use it to illustrate the calculation, the concept of producer surplus, but this, I got to bring my laser pointer one of these days, but at least I'm pretty tall. See where the blue line hits the origin there? Right, it says at a price just a teensy-weensy bit above zero, some of it will be out there. Not for very many things. Okay, so usually the minimum, the graph way on the left, is quite a bit above zero. Okay, anyway. I said I'll talk to Alex about this too. Just some minor stuff that could stand fixing. Okay, so a price of 40, there's your producer surplus. See, it's a triangle. It says what? It says that some output has higher opportunity cost than others. Right? That barrel per day, that barrel of oil, that according to this graph has almost a zero opportunity cost. Well, I did actually say, that Saudi Arabia poke a hole in the ground and it'll almost load itself, but still, that's going to cost a couple bucks a barrel at least. And just to poke a big hole in the ground and put a pipe, down to the nearest, down to the ocean. Okay, so anyway. But this says that, there's a gain from trade. This graph doesn't have this little bar in it. Remember the consumer surplus bar where it says the president's consumer surplus? And then I think it said down there, Joe's consumer. This needs that too, right? Because there are many producers represented by that line, that supply line. And some of them have low opportunity costs and some have higher opportunity costs. And so you could do the same thing, and maybe you should for study practices, and say, this is, put a little bar there from the origin all the way up to the 40. And I need to get that iPad that I can eventually, I'm a dinosaur, I'm still trying to figure out how to use it and get signed onto it and everything. But then I could circle it for you instead of my laser pointer, right, which I need to bring too. Okay, but put a little bar in there to say, okay, this is firm X's opportunity cost, right, at 40, right? Somebody really efficient at producing the oil is going to have a $40 consumer surplus from that first million barrels per day. Okay, and then somebody out there is going to have almost no producer surplus because their opportunity cost is pretty darn close to $40 a barrel. And they're just thinking, should I produce, should I sell this? Why not? Just barely covering the cost of production. See, and that's why that's the last one produced, because it's just barely worth it. Okay, so, and then we just do the simple math here. What else? It wouldn't hurt to have a little dotted line down there. I think the $40 comes over to 60 quantity. Okay, assuming that, what's the producer surplus? It would be, we'll have a top hat question in this in a minute. But let's see, the dimensions of the triangle are 40 on the y-axis and 60 on the x-axis. 40 times 60 divided by 2 is 1,200, I think. Is that right, 1,200? Yeah. Again, that's a fishing for questions. If you're thinking, where on earth did that 1,200 come from? Talk to me. Okay, guaranteed it's going to be on the test. I know it's on the homework too. It's not maybe you won't ask the, I did and I will. In fact, that's as many questions as I can find that involve having to do a tiny bit of math, I use. And the reason I do that is because it's impossible to memorize the answer for those. You must do a little bit of thinking and applying in order to know what to divide by or multiply by or subtract or add from something else. Even if it's a ridiculously simple piece of math, you have to know what math to do. How to do the math. In this case, it better not be the barrier. I say that because this is 5th grade math, but something like that. And nevertheless, if you're struggling with 5th grade math, you have a math phobia, boy, you better get something done about that rather than just make it as an excuse for failure. Okay, but somewhere along the lines, got to get it done. All right, so let's see. All right, we'll leave it there. Yes?
What would happen if the line would jump $20 and up to 60?
Oh, okay. Let me make sure that I understand what you're saying and write it for everybody else. Okay, so right now we have okay, so that's what we have right now. And I'm tempted to be lazy too. Always put your P in your Q and make sure you think about what it says. Okay, so you're saying, what if it did this, I think, is what you're saying. Is that right? Okay, so this would be 20. All right, so that would be 40 minus 20 is 20. Okay, so this difference is 20, and then it's still 60 on the other side, so that'd be 600. 600 producer surplus. Yeah, don't forget to divide by 2. 20 by 60 divided by 2 is the same thing as 10 by 60, which is why I was able to do it in my head so fast. Because 10 by 60, right? You just add a 0 to the 60, 600. Don't say okay if it's not okay. Remember, our hero is Sam Donaldson. Remember Sam Donaldson? Now he's a reporter before your time. Okay?
We'll use the base times height divided by 2.
Yeah.
So 40 minus 20 and then...
Right. It doesn't matter whether you call this the base or the height. It doesn't, you just multiply this times this and then divide by 2. Because if you don't divide it by 2, then what you just took the area of is this. Twice what the producer surplus is. And the why did I do this answer to why you divide by 2 other than it's a triangle, that's just mechanics. But what's the economics behind the divide by 2? Well, because the average producer surplus is the average of this and 0. Okay, so the average producer surplus times 60 units worth of it, 60 times that average, is what you're doing. So the average of this and this is 20 plus 0 divided by 2. Okay. Right, the extreme gain from trade is on the left. Right? The minimum gain from trade, 0, is on the right. What's the average producer gain from trade? It's half of that, halfway in between. Okay, so it's the same thing as the divide by 2 for a triangle, but that's the economic reason for it. Yes?
The producer surplus area is like above the supply curve and below the price.
Yeah, see, that's the thing a lot of you are going to memorize, and for some of you it'll work.
But it's like
Price minus supply, right? And that's right.
But the below the price is like below the producer surplus price. Like below the price is below.
Between the price and the supply line, which represents opportunity cost, that's the area that represents all the gains from trade for all the people producing it. All those that's why I said draw that bar like from the demand graph. Because what you're doing by taking that area is doing in one step what you could do in 60 steps. What 60 steps? This, plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this. So there's, 60 of them. 60 of those little bars. You can estimate that all in one fell swoop by taking the area of the triangle.
So like the reason why it stops at 40.
They what?
Like the reason why it stops at 40, like that's the.
Well, because that's the amount of money that you go ka-ching on every time you make a sale.
Okay, that's a total producer surplus.
That's the producer surplus. Now, what's above the 40? The consumer surplus. See the light. There's where that was the light going on, the thumb going up. Yeah. See, above the 40 is the person, the other side of the handshake, saying, "Yeah, I'll do that deal. Yeah, at $40, sold." Screeching a little bit there. Sorry. I get excited too. The thumbs up, Yeah. Do my Fonz imitation or something. One thumbs up from you is good for two for me. Okay. So yeah, above the 40, that's the buyer's gain from trade. Yeah, the person turning over some dollars and taking a product, saying, "Cool. Why are they doing that?" Because otherwise they would have had to ponder making it themselves, which might have had a phenomenal opportunity cost, right, to make something themselves rather than pay somebody else to do it. Like if some pipe broke in my old house, I could do it myself, possibly. It might take a couple of weeks, and it might leak the first few times after I tried. Eventually, I'd get it. It'd be much smarter for me to call a plumber, right?
Is there a formula to find the?
Huh?
Is there a formula to find the buyer's gain?
Yeah, it's the demand minus price. It's a triangle again. Okay, it's the demand line indicates the buyer's willingness to pay. Marginal benefit is the other term for it, right? MC, marginal cost, is this opportunity cost for one more. In fact, let's deal with that a little bit while we have this up here. Okay, so what does this 60 say and this 40 say here together at this point? We need to interpret some points along the way to get friendly with these lines. Well, what this says is let's just make this, okay, well, just stick with that. Instead of concrete, let's just stick with the oil. Okay, 1 million barrels per day. Okay, so it says the 60th million barrels per day changes the total cost by $40 a barrel. Okay, another way to say it. The 60th one, going from 59 to 60, the additional cost of doing that, of saying, should I do the 60th one? Okay. Whoa, that adds $40 per barrel to my costs to do that. Can I get the $40 a barrel back? Just barely. Right, because that's the going rate. Okay, I'll do it. Oops, the price is only $39 today. Can't recover my $40 opportunity cost for making that last barrel. Back up. See, it's that balancing act that determines the quantity of it. It's not just an accident how much ends up in the market. Everyone out there is doing at the margin, should I do one more? Doing that, can I recover this or more than recover? And if more than recover, maybe I should do even more than that. But at some point they get to where the next one is, no, the next one is more opportunity cost than I can sell it for, and stop. Okay, maybe they're thinking if I had more machines or more employees, I'd make more, and then they try to do that. For the time being, they're saying, this is it. I'm not going to do any more than this. And the marginal benefit reaches the marginal cost. Or the marginal cost reaches what the market says the marginal benefit is. The price, typically. Now, it's more complicated than that. Sometimes the marginal benefit of making a sale isn't just the price you get from it, because it gets people in your store and they may buy other stuff. Okay, but most of the time, the marginal benefit to a firm from a sale is the price paid for that item. Okay. Fun never ends unless you let it. Don't ever forget that. All right. All right, so we've already got the, at least the third graph over from your left. That's a decrease in supply. Okay, the line moved. There's nothing, well, when I initially drew it, there was nothing on there but price and quantity. But, okay, how do we know it's a decrease in supply? Because at a price, any given price, pick one, I picked one, okay, the quantity is less than it used to be. Okay, vice versa for an increase in supply. Changes in supply are inversely related to the costs of production. Is that worth memorizing? No. What does it mean? Well, it means if one of the inputs, labor, capital, were to cost more, you wouldn't be able to offer as much for sale at a given price. That's worth thinking through. Memorizing some for it now. Thinking about what it means, yes. Okay, so I've got a decrease in supply up there, up here on the overhead. There's an increase in supply. See, again, it looks like it's going down. I've seen many times over my 30 years of doing this where the student says in words, here is a supply increase, and they draw that graph. No. Okay, or the one up here, Doc, here is a supply decrease. No, you just drew a supply increase. Okay? Fishing for questions, all right? Not trying to save you reading the book, trying to help you understand it. All right, and there we have the graph that I have there, only the arrows look different, but it's the same thing. The new supply, that's S1, right, the little subscript indicating time period. Higher numbers are later time periods. Okay, vertically, horizontally, either way we can look at it. All right, here's our list of shifters. I added one over what's in the book. For some reason they don't mention weather. I guess maybe it's not a shifter for everything. Thought I'd better add it because it's such an obvious shifter for a lot of things. Okay, we can talk about some of these. I think most of them are duh, but let's move on to the slides where it mentions them, and you can tell me if it's duh or not. You know, if you invent something that makes it take fewer resources to make something, yeah, I think that would make more available at any given price. Okay? So, technology is definitely a supply shifter. Lowers the per unit costs. Make sure you think in terms of per unit costs. That's why it's important to remind yourself on a regular basis what P stands for. P is not total spent. Price per unit. And if you get confused between, 10 of these costs $50 each, 500, that's not the price. Yeah, that's the checkout receipt, yes. Price is the amount per unit. Okay, and then again, I think it's fairly reasonably self-explanatory that if one of the things that you have to buy in order to produce the product you make, the input, gets more expensive, you're not going to offer as much for sale at a given price as before. Right? You have to cut back on production typically to lower your opportunity costs a little bit. Okay, so input prices is a relatively obvious supply shifter. And a tax you could think of as an input. Okay, I mean the government, right? You got to pay your workers, got to pay for your machines, got to pay for your materials, and you got to pay the government. Okay, so if the government's share of your costs increases by a tax increase, you're not going to be able to sell as much at a given price as before. You won't be willing to offer for sale as much at the same price as before. Okay, subsidy is the opposite of a tax. If they underwrite your production costs by sending you money every time you make something, it doesn't cost as much per unit to make things anymore, right? And so you can offer more for sale at a given price. Okay, just the supply line shifts upward, decreases, it shifts upward by the amount of the tax. Again, duh, I think. Right? If you were willing to offer 60 million barrels per day, and if the entire market as a whole were willing to provide 60 million barrels per day at a $40 per barrel cost without the tax. Now, if you impose a $10 tax, it's going to take $50 per barrel to elicit the 60 million barrels per day. Now, that part of it is sort of duh. But what's mind-blowing at times is, what if you stuck the demand line in there? I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit. That comes up in chapter 4. I like to get people thinking, and wow, I didn't realize, because this is mind-blowing. Most people just assume, you put a $10 tax on something, price is going to go up by $10. Well, it's quite a bit more interesting, and complicated might not be the right term, but it's not quite that simple. Okay? If you stick a demand line on there, is the demand and supply going to intersect at $10 higher than before? So what does that mean? That means if you put a $10 tax on something, the equilibrium price, the market price, isn't going to go up $10. Whoa, how's that? Well, it means the seller has to absorb some of the tax in the short run. So what happens then? Well, it means some of the sellers can't do that, right? Because they're already just barely making it, and they go out of business, and that decreases the supply. And eventually, in the long run, the consumer will bear all of the cost of the tax, but not in the short run. In the short run, the price does not increase by the amount of the tax. Why is that? Again, what's another reason for that? The only way that could be possible for the price, say at the 60 here, to go up to $50 and that be the new going rate is if buyers of oil were willing to continue to buy the 60 at a $10 higher price. No, not going to happen. The law of demand says, no, if you raise the price from 40 to 50, regardless of where the money goes, some consumers are going to say it's not worth it anymore. They're going to cut back their purchases. Okay, so there's no way the market clearing price can rise by the full amount of the tax because people aren't going to want to buy the same amount as before at the, in this case, $10 higher cost. The price will go up, but not by the full $10. There was an article in the newspaper some many, many years ago that was talking about a 5-cent a gallon gasoline tax, and I think they had it right. They said, this tax goes into effect December 1st, and for probably a while, the price will be about 3 cents a gallon higher than it otherwise would have been. I'm sure a lot of people read that, whoa, why not 5 cents? Well, because they won't be able to pass on the full 5-cent a gallon tax. Right? The amount purchased will not stay the same at 5 cents a gallon more. Now, eventually, with the supply decrease, because marginal producers that can't make it at the lower net price will go out of business, and then that'll shift the supply line to the left, and the price will go up the other 2 cents. And that's the market mechanism at work. So it's kind of like culling the herd, the old Darwinian thing, natural selection, right? If you put a tax in place, it means that the least fit firms are going to be toast. Because they won't be able to absorb any of the tax in the short run, and so they'll be done. And then that will allow the remaining firms to pass on the tax eventually in full. They won't have as many competitors, they can charge more. All right, we'll do more of that. I thought, again, a little repetition. We'll do more of that equilibrium stuff next week as we do chapter 4. It's all in the same test, so eventually you'll need to get into all of that. Okay, again, rational and maybe painful but efficient behavior, right? If there's an expectation of better prices from the seller's perspective, remember supply is all about sellers, what are they going to rationally do? They're trying to make as much money as they can on their ability to produce the good. If they think prices are going to be higher later, they're going to produce maybe as much or more now, but they won't put out as much for sale. They'll put it in storage to sell for later. And that helps later, right? That's why I say efficient, because later if they're right about whatever it was going to raise the price, right, that price won't go up as much, will it, from the stuff that they have in storage. So it cuts into the price increase. But what does it also do? That second from the bottom bullet there. Regardless of why they think the price is going to be higher in the future, if enough producers believe it, it will be higher in the future. Now, it may not stick. Okay? Maybe somebody reads the almanac and it says the weather's going to be really bad this year, and so a lot of farmers put crop in storage to sell for them. And then the weather's fine. Whoops. Now the price is going to tank. Right? Because not only is there a bumper crop, but there's all this stuff in storage. Oh well. But if it actually does go up later, right, it's a good forecast, right, then it won't go up as much because the expectation drives increased production but decreased supply. Yeah, there's something to absorb. Increased production but decreased supply. Right? Supply, the line on the graph is how much is offered for sale, which can be less than the amount that they actually manufacture. Right? Deciding to put some of it in storage for later, thinking that the price is going to be higher. Okay, so a lot of not so obvious things to kind of sort through what supply means, what price means. Okay, what upward sloping means. Opportunity cost. All the things you need to do translation for. Sorry, Cajun man there. Lapse into that so readily. See, now this comes close here. That blue line almost touches that x-axis. I get after Alex for that. Not quite, right? Maybe it tails off there, goes over to the y-axis. All right? See, and they nailed it there in terms of their arrow. Right? That shift isn't because they're making less, it's because they're not offering all of it for sale. Some of it's going into storage to hopefully make more money later on. Right? So like an oil business, right, if you think prices are going to go up, you're just not going to pump as much out of the ground now. You'll wait till later. Right? It's already in storage, right, underground. And then later, when you think you will make more money on your resource, right, rational behavior, you'll take it out of the ground. You may be forced to at that point, even if the forecast isn't true, because you didn't make as much money in the short run, and now you're kind of behind, and oops, the price isn't higher. I've got to sell it anyway. May or may not happen. Okay? Self-fulfilling prophecies are only temporary sometimes. Okay, and here's the long-run thing I was getting into. It's definitely a supply shifter, how many producers there are. Existing producer expanding, that's along the supply line. Okay, because that's what the existing supply line reflects, the opportunity costs of existing producers. Additional producers, or fewer producers, that shifts the supply line. Okay, and again, just for practice, draw the graph. It may seem mundanely obvious and simple. Practice. It doesn't take long either. So here's a case where we open up the market to foreigners, and suddenly we discover, wow, the Canadians have a bunch of oil, and if we make it possible for them to sell their oil here, they may export some of their oil to us. And until recently, we were a comparative disadvantaged country in oil, and we still import oil, but not nearly as much as we used to. All right, so again, the same horizontal or vertical thing about more for the same price or a lower price for the same amount. Okay, so here's one that I added to the list that's in the book. There are weather events that are shifters. Sometimes it's predictable, construction shifter. In some places it gets too cold, too snowy, too icy to do much construction, at least outdoors, certain times of the year. So those construction workers and firms pack up and head south to Texas or something where you can still work in the wintertime, or where you actually prefer maybe to work here. And their home places, the supply decreases. So if you want to do something outside in Illinois in the middle of the wintertime, you have to pay a whole lot, not just because it's really unpleasant to work out there in the ice and snow in January, and also because there's not very much competition then, because a lot of those producers anticipating low demand said, I'm out of here. I'll be back in the spring. And then, of course, there's some that are surprise factors, like, oops, it didn't rain. There goes our crop. They don't use the term production substitute, but that's what this means. That this is from their slide. Right? If you're sitting there trying to figure out how to use your resources, and you have choices as a producer, I could produce this or produce that. Right? I could produce cars, or I could produce trucks. Okay, a factory. Okay, or like when wars are either ongoing or imminent. We can't make as many trucks and cars. We've got to make some tanks, right, for the military. Okay, and you try to figure out how many, one versus the other one. You're talking production substitutes. You're looking at opportunity costs. You're saying for every car I make, I can't make as many tanks. Here's what they're paying for tanks. Okay, so, how many trucks do I want to make so that the rate of return on tanks versus trucks will be about the same? That sort of thing. Farmer is the most obvious, continuous, regular example. Most any farm or ranch has a choice each growing season of what mix of things to produce. Production substitutes. If the price of one goes up, that means you've increased the opportunity cost of making other things. So you make fewer of those other things. Okay, so to get right down to the nitty-gritty, if two items are production substitutes, an increased price for one will decrease the supply of the other one. Okay, you can write that down, and you should, and later on get to duh. Right? If I were Farmer Jones and I could grow crop X and crop Y, and the price of X goes up, now the opportunity cost of growing Y is higher, so I produce less Y and more X. Okay. And then there are production complements, right, which are things made together. So the secondary product, a byproduct of making the primary product, and often the things that are made together, there's not primary or secondary, but usually one is the dominant product, and the other one just comes along for the ride. So beef and leather, I suspect beef is the primary product. That market drives the supply of leather, right? Because once you carve up the animal for the meat, you've got this hide, right? And again, you can make leather products from it. Okay, so an increased demand for beef, I'm jumping the gun on chapter 4 again, an increased demand for beef, which in the short run will drive up the price of beef and the quantity supplied of beef, will increase the supply of leather. Yeah. Right, so for no supply shift in the beef market, right? Demand shifts for beef, quantity supplied goes up, not supply. But in the leather market, there is a shift. More leather is available at the same price than before because of the increased availability of the hides, because of the increased provision of the meat. That demands some study. Right? Hit all those ducks in a row, or all those cows in a row, or whatever. Again, don't function in the abstract. Right? If there's a question about production complements, think beef and leather, or some other ones that you can readily relate to. If this happens to this, oh yeah, that would happen to leather. Yeah, duh. Okay, so if there's a anti-meat kind of vegetarian beef is bad for you kind of a craze, that means purses and shoes are going to cost more, aren't they? Right? If there's a drought that forces the ranchers to unload their cattle, right, because they can't feed them, in the short run, that'll make leather products cheaper. In the long run, it'll make them more expensive. See all the ways you can make money on the market, too, by just being kind of ahead of some of these trends? Thinking production substitutes and complements. You'd say you saw that coming, a drought. Oh, the cattle ranchers are selling off their herds, right? Which means lots of leather is going to be available. But beyond the immediate, their herds are going to be really small, and so in the next season, there's not going to be much leather available. So, that'll drive up leather prices. It's not rocket science. It's just confidence in some fundamentals, right? This is ECO 2023. I'm not talking PhD economics. This means if you grasp this, you're way ahead of others in, say, picking stocks. Now, that doesn't mean this is the whole story, because once you do that, then you better pick a good company, right? And then you're ready to do some homework. You better do it fast, because other people have the ECO 2023 skills, and if they remember the thing that I did about the Winnebagos. Yeah, if you're not fast, you'll buy high and sell low, right? So you have to be smart and fast and buy in before the price rises, and sell before it falls. Questions? This is the hardest part of the supply part, is the production substitutes and complements, because those words, substitute and complement, appear twice. Once in the demand side and once in the supply side, and you got to do some work to disentangle that in your brain. Again, you're much more used to thinking as a consumer, and so you see the word substitute, and okay, that's one thing used in place of another. Well, yeah, those are consumption substitutes. But maybe the question's about production substitutes, and so now you got to pretend you're a farmer trying to figure out what crop to plant. Okay, which you probably have never done before. Many times you said, should I buy this or this? Should I produce this or this? Probably not so much. All right, let's see. All right. Okay, so again, they draw the graph, just kind of encouraging you to produce that good habit, do the same thing. Okay, this is what if the price of X goes up and Y is a production substitute for X. Supply of Y will go down. See, there I said it. But doc, the red line's above the black line. Yeah, the supply went down. Even if the line is drawn up, it decreased. Say decreased instead of down. That's better. Down is easier to say, but decreased, shifted left, which also looks like it shifted up. But you got to deal with it. It's just something that potential source of confusion. Okay. I think we did this. I know there's 5 slides left, but they're review, and we'll do the review. But I want to make sure we get to the top hat questions before the time runs out. There's only 3 of them, but I want to make sure we get them because, because as you know, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where the denial reaches the Mediterranean. Too many metaphors, you say. Right? Denial. Not just a river in Africa. Yeah, at some point it flows into the Mediterranean. Through Egypt. That's where it ends. All right, so here's our first one of these. And there you go. And I forgot to do attendance. We'll do that before the period ends too. So now you get your devices fired up. You'll be ready to do attendance before we leave. And I apologize to the 2 people that had to leave early. Whoops, they'll get counted absent. Again, the attendance is not that big of a deal. Pretend the course is online if you're getting it without the lecture or by viewing the lectures online rather than showing up. I have no problem with that. Okay? Attendance matters only if you start acting irresponsibly and you're not getting it by when you're not here. I'll shut up. See, now in this question, I didn't say exactly how, I didn't use the jargon, how oats and corn are related. You got to do that. Right? That's part of the test that this question achieves. Oh, oats and corn are, see, you're thinking production, complement, production, substitute, consumption, substitute, complement, one of those to answer this question. All righty. Let's see how we did here. All right, so let's see. I forgot my question. The predominant answer was C, but plenty of, oops. I had to disable the submissions. Okay, so the predominant answer was C. Is that right? Oats and corn, an increase in demand for oats, that'll short run drive, yeah, decrease the supply of corn. All right, the higher opportunity cost for the oats, because of its higher price, makes some of the producers shift some of their land and other resources into making corn. That'll decrease the supply of corn. Now we can have some Q&A from those of you who picked the other choices. Maybe you did the whoops. No, I thought you meant consumption substitute. Although again, it didn't say, did it? Right? You had to decide based on the description. Oh, a farmer can do one of these or the other. Which of those things that it was? Or you could skip that step and just go to the logic or common sense of, if this happened and I was a farmer, what would I do? Okay, and then hopefully pick C either way. Oats and corn are production substitutes. That's what that first sentence of that question is saying. One can be produced in place of the other with similar resources. The same land, the same tools, the same knowledge.
So wouldn't that also decrease the demand for corn?
No.
Oats are more beneficial than the farmer? And you only have a certain amount of...
No, because, well, there's 2 ways to think about it. It doesn't change anybody's desire to consume corn if the price of oats goes up. I love corn every bit as much today as tomorrow if the price of oats doubles, and so does everybody else. Now, you may be thinking, quantity demanded. Yeah, they don't do that. See, and like I said, then the second way, other than just sort of think your way through it, the second way is to maybe have on a piece of paper, so you don't have to go between screens a lot, the list of the shifters and say, was any of these affected? Okay, you go through the list of the demand shifters. No, none of these were affected by the change in the price of oats. Okay, and one of the reasons that I described it that way is, right, so that it would rule out that they're not consumption substitutes, right? Okay, so there's nothing on the demand shifter list of 7 things that says, oh, that would be affected, and therefore the demand would shift either right or left. You're thinking quantity demanded. That semantic thing is hard to get past. But quantity demanded, that's moving along the line, it doesn't move. And then the demand moving, that's the line moving. All right, so that's why we do, we have the learning curve, we have this, and so those are free mistakes, get that out of your system. And then we have the graded homework, which are really cheap mistakes, to hopefully get those mistakes out of your system. See, and then the exam, that's where the mistakes aren't so cheap anymore. All right, so we have several levels of detection of the things that you thought you meant something. Remember, that's the deadliest phrase in the English language. I thought you meant. In your lifetime, that phrase will cause you more grief than any other short phrase that you can imagine. All the times you miscommunicated with somebody where you meant X and they thought you meant Y and they did something terrible as a result. Okay, moving on to the next. Okay, again, same starting point as the other one. Oats and corn are production substitutes. Now, I confess I jumped the gun a little bit on this question. It probably belongs in Chapter 4 where it gets into both supply and demand, but I've covered this several times. So, again, repetition is a good thing. Get into it again in Chapter 4. All right, since we're running short on time, I better disable. It's D is the answer. D is correct. And most people pick D, but a lot of pick... see, it's that semantic thing again. The change in the price, an increase in the demand for oats, doesn't do anything about the supply of oats. Some quantity supplied, yeah. But it doesn't affect any of the things on that list of shifters for the supply. Corn, yes. Doc's a sneaky man. He may ask this question in the test, and where it says oats, he'll put the word corn. And I'll have to look at that, and that may make more than one of those true. But then maybe E would be the answer, where it's more than one of the above. Ponder that as you study. That sneaky man, he's a little lazy and busy too. How would he change this question? A couple of words here or there, even a couple of letters here and there, to make it have a different right answer. I think like that. All right. Moving on to the third and final one that I have here, thankfully, since we're almost out of time. All right, here's another one of these where you can either deal with it with an air graph or throw up your hands and say, I have no idea. Or you can say, I understand what these words mean. I can draw a graph that reflects that in a millisecond and answer this with some very easy math. All of which takes a long time if you didn't practice it first. And you don't have a long time for question. Practice, practice, practice. Oh, wait a minute. I don't need this on here for this question. So, I'm kind of giving a hint, which means my data will be flawed here in terms of who knew what. But if you can't draw this graph based on that information, there's something wrong with your preparation process, how you process the readings. It very likely means that just eyes are moving over paper. So then you see the question, what do I do? Beam me up, Scotty. Help Mr. Wizard. All those things that you say when you have no idea and the clock is going tick, tick, tick on the test and you're running out of time. You're going to get that one wrong unless you guess it right and waste time that you could have used on another one too. All things that are not good. Okay, so it's 400. And let's see how many people. Let's see, it's kind of, at least the majority, kind of all over the map. Okay, so the first part was to be able to draw the graph. And then the next part is to take 8 times 100 and divide by 2, and that's 400. Okay? So that's the producer surplus, price minus opportunity cost, price minus supply, and that's 400. I forgot to disable the answers. There. Again, it's not one of those things that's going to make a big deal. It's mostly participation. But answer honestly, because you'll learn from it, and I learned from it. Like that Chapter 2 stuff, that was just mind-blowing. I've got to retool a little bit there on some of that stuff that I think I'm explaining with brilliance, and I'm not, because a lot of people are still not getting it. All right, back to the PowerPoint ever so briefly, because we have a couple of minutes left, so just calm down. The process of exiting is noisy. So let's just get through these last couple of slides, which are review, which are check yourself, fishing for questions kind of things. Okay, technological innovations in chip making. Okay, an improvement in technology shifter. What happens to the supply curve of computers? Why? Well, it shifts to the right. There's an increased supply. Why? Because they can make the same computer at a lower dollar cost than they could before. Okay, so and then subsidizes ethanol as a fuel. What does the have effect on the supply curve? It shifts to the right. More ethanol available at any given price. What happens to other uses of corn? This has been a disaster in a lot of parts of the world, right? Because the corn has been diverted to making ethanol. It shifts to the left. And so food prices have gone up in a lot of places. In a lot of places where food is a major, major, major share of living, more so than here, it's been a disaster. The U.S. subsidies for ethanol have caused some starvation in other parts of the world. Okay, demand is only about buyers. Yes, changes in supply can change the quantity demanded, but not the demand for anything. Okay. Consumer surplus is the area between value and price, demand minus price, and then the producer surplus is between price and opportunity cost. And here's the shifters, just as a reminder. I'm not going to put up the one for supply because it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same idea and you've seen it already. And besides, it's 9:45, so my southern accent, time is up. My little boys, which by the way, they're on my tie, they hate it when I read a story to them in southern. Critics. Daddy, read in English. No, not Southern English, no. But you're a Texan boy. Read in regular English.